So this is the UK Made Easy webinar focusing on helping companies that are looking at expanding to the UK and why the UK should be the #1 destination, and then also some of the challenges which clients often face when they are new to the UK market. Just by introduction, my name is James Service. I'm marketing manager here at Goodwill, and for the past 15 years, I've been helping companies from abroad that are looking at expanding into the UK market.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Kevin Rutter. I am CEO here at Goodwill. I, by profession, am a qualified chartered accountant and spent many years prior to joining Goodwill working in medium-sized to large professional services business. Joined Goodwill 7 years ago and became CEO 2 years ago, working with James and the team to help businesses come to the UK. So if we can give you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today, we'll tell you a little bit about Goodwill, the details about what we do and some of our background. We will talk you through the UK landscape as we see it currently, referencing the recent past with regards to things like Brexit and how the future may look. Practical indicative timelines about what typically happens on a setup journey into the UK in a range of different areas. And then critically, over the past 25 years, clearly we've worked with many hundreds of clients and we've learned lots of lessons, and we want to give you some insights into some of the key takeaways from that. Finally, and very importantly, the opportunity for you all to ask questions, which we very much encourage. So about Goodwill, what are we and what do we do? So we've been around now for over 25 years. In fact, this time last year, we celebrated our 25th anniversary. We're a professional services organization focusing on inbound into the UK from principally the Nordic region. We're very strongly connected in that part of the world. We were founded by a Swede. We have numerous Nordic employees, which is really important in terms of that cultural understanding and giving clear guidance cross-border on things that really matter. And what we want to do in this session really is to talk to and reach out to businesses who are thinking about moving to the UK, whether they are new businesses looking to move swiftly, or perhaps you've been operating in Sweden or another country for a long time and are thinking about making that leap. In terms of our offerings, what we do and what we've been doing for those 25 years, we have 5 core departments. Corporate governance, so that's really all about compliance, filings, risk, company secretarial and related. Finance, think in-house finance function, but that's anything and everything from day-to-day transactional, monthly close and reporting, quarterly VAT to annual, but with an advisory layer on top of all of that. Human resources, where we fulfill services for the full employee life cycle from pre-employment, so we can advise on things like salary and package benchmarking, to policies and procedures, contracts, administration, and then actually really importantly, help and guide through when things go wrong, and they do go wrong, unfortunately, and that's something we could touch on the lessons learned section a little bit later on. Payroll obviously goes very neatly hand in hand with HR, and I think is super important because it affects all of our clients' employees and is often one of the first things that those people get to deal with. And so, understanding the fact that we're working with businesses who are not familiar with the UK landscape and making sure we make that absolutely clear and deliver paying your people on time is really important. And finally, virtual offices, phones, post. If you don't need an office in the UK in those early days, we are your office for you. And we can, in terms of how that works and how we deliver on that, very flexible approach, almost pick and mix. May use something one month and not the next. As you scale, we can add to that. We have a very flexible offering built upon building relationships. And we allocate controllers across all of our teams to all of our clients, and using slick systems, cloud-based technology to make sure that processes work as cleanly as possible and you get what you need in terms of information and advice when you need it. We work across all sectors, over 500 clients currently, and we've helped 2,000 or more through our lifetime. And there are some names there of some of the people that we have worked with, and indeed in most cases are still working with. As I said earlier, our heritage is very strongly in the Nordics, but also into Central Europe as well, and some US clients. But the biggest connections are very definitely in the part of the world where I think most of you guys are from. So why the UK? James, if I can pass that across to you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So the first point there, Kevin will touch on a little bit more later on. But in terms of setting up in the UK, the process is fairly straightforward compared to many places in Europe and the rest of the world. So there is no requirement to have a UK-based director. So first, Kevin mentioned lots of our clients are headquartered abroad, so maybe don't have any presence in the UK to start with or people here. So the fact that there is no requirement for that UK-based director can make it considerably easier. And the share capital minimum is just one share at £1, which is also beneficial. Corporation tax rate starts from 19%. It's tapered upwards, but 19% is the small corporation tax rate, and it's favourable compared to many parts of Europe too. There's some really good universities, some of the best universities in the world. Cambridge, Oxford, obviously located not far outside of London, means access to talent is good. So there's lots of tech developers here in the UK, and obviously lots of big tech companies have their headquarters based in London. The geography of the UK makes it very accessible. So the large portion of the UK is accessible within 2 hours if you base yourself in and around London. So that's through road or by rail. So again, compared to many places around Europe, it can take days in some cases to get to parts of your country. So the UK is very accessible, which is advantageous again, especially when you have maybe a small team that you want to base strategically across the UK. Then it's easy to cover large parts of the geography. Lots of people see the UK as a stepping stone if they want to go over to the US ultimately. And it's a good place to test yourself, especially outside of your home market. So with regards to the time zone, if you're based within the EU, with regards to the language, most people speak English. So yeah, it's a good place to test yourself if you are ultimately looking to expand into the US. Those things said, obviously, sadly, at some point we did decide to leave the EU. So we do treat the rest of Europe now kind of like the rest of the world. So when it comes to the movement of people into the UK, when it comes to the movement of goods cross-border into the UK, there are some challenges which you will face with regards to import VAT, maybe customs and duties, the requirement for sponsorship license or for certain types of visas, should you wish to move individuals from your home market into the UK. And those things take time to get set up and to get put in place. And obviously it is a longer process. However, we still see, and we see lots of our clients, the benefits outweighs that initial administration that you need to do to enter the UK market. So that was why we would say the UK market should still be on your radar. And we know when people are expanding from the Nordic region, they will often consider the likes of Germany, they will consider the UK. Maybe there's less administration to go into Germany initially, but we still see the UK as being a really strong market and one which should definitely be considered. If we move on a slide and we look at the landscape within the UK, it is still the most popular country for European startups to set up their international office. So as I mentioned, people consider typically Germany, maybe France, UK, but the UK still remains the strongest. The access to funding is often what those clients would typically want to get. So whether it be angel investors, whether it be VC funding, whether it be the grants which are available. So there's some great grants from the UK government, things like Innovate UK, where you can get £50,000. There's a whole range of things, and those things are definitely worth exploring. We run a scheme in the UK by the government called R&D tax credits, where if you undertake certain activities within the UK, you can see a reduction on your corporation tax bill, and that's significant amount of money. I think the average claim on an R&D tax credit is again around £50,000. So it's worth exploring those schemes before you decide to set up here, seeing which activities you can move to the UK and how obviously you can maximise the reduction in your corporation tax bill. So it's something that's definitely worth exploring. When we look a bit more at the trends and things which are common within the UK currently, and certain regions on the next slide, then the trends in the UK follow things that we're seeing globally and things that are probably common in your home market as well. So the e-commerce market in the UK is the biggest market in Europe. 200 billion euros in 2021 was spent online. From a consumer goods perspective, there's a shift towards personalized, connected and environmentally friendly goods, something to bear in mind. The renewable energy sector in the UK is growing massively. Five-fold increase is expected by 2030. Kevin, I know you mentioned there was something today that was announced in the news, I think, with regards to the renewable energy and onshore.
Yeah, they've recently, I think just today or indeed yesterday, perhaps, they've just softened a little bit some of the restrictions on building the onshore wind capacity in the UK.
Cool. And the fintech sector and the tech sector continues to grow obviously rapidly within the UK market. We've seen significant growth over the past 5 years, but it's an industry which is expected to see grow again year on year until at least 2025. From our perspective, in terms of the kind of clients that we are helping to set up in the UK, SaaS businesses constantly wanting to open sales offices within the UK. We see it every week, new businesses coming here, cybersecurity, AI growing and developing rapidly. So yeah, that's the kind of industries which we see the growth in currently, kind of themes and industries I'm sure which you would also see back in your home markets too. Something to bear in mind when you do come to the UK, and we speak to lots of companies and they say they want to set up in London, and when they say London, maybe they actually mean the UK generally. And there are benefits of setting up outside of London, which Kevin will touch on now.
Yeah, I think James is absolutely right. I mean, for obvious reasons, people initially, in most cases, think London, and why not? I mean, it's a fantastic city. It's a world-leading city. It's the centre of the finance world in Europe, or one of, and so quite rightly, it is and should be considered. But there are many other places as well that may well better suit your business depending on what you do. You know, there are pools of talent in numerous cities around the UK. You can see some of them on the slides there. And perhaps James and I are a little bit biased because neither of us live in London. We are a London business and we work a lot from London. But Birmingham, where we live, known for manufacturing, engineering, and Manchester for textiles, in addition to those things as well. Scotland, particularly two big cities on there, really worth visiting as well. I think that little London phrase is really quite appropriate. It's very important to consider those areas as well. And Liverpool and Leeds as well. So I think the takeaway message from that is do not dismiss those cities in terms of the markets and critically, in many cases, the talent that can be available in those parts of the country as well. In terms of moving to the UK, then how do you do it? There are many ways. It's a big journey to go on. And I think clearly you need to be in a place in terms of your product, your technology, whatever it is you're trying to sell, where you're comfortable, you've got something that can work. Typically, you'll have tested that in your home market, but you want to expand. We've talked about the UK and why. So how do you do it? Numerous routes. One for physical goods is using the agent distributor model, which is not something we support. That's, you know, a third party. It's distant. You're shipping goods across. Someone else deals with it. We don't go there. If you need people on the ground, and we don't usually see, it depends to some degree again in terms of what you do, but that boots on the ground, to use that phrase, we see as being critically important if you want to be taken seriously in the UK. You need people who are there talking to people, doing business, actually bringing your culture across if you send people from overseas, and working with UK people who you build your team to. So you can employ people from the overseas entity. That's absolutely fine. It's entirely legal. There can be some restrictions on that, however, in certain cases in terms of activities. And also something really important to consider is there's a line that can be crossed where if you are doing certain things, or if you have physical presence, if you're doing this decision making, senior people, if you're doing those things in the UK, then you are required to either incorporate a limited company or register a branch of your overseas company, because what you've done is you've created what's called a taxable presence. And either of those routes can work. So limited company, that would typically be a 100% subsidiary owned by the parent company, the Swedish entity, for example. The key thing with a limited company versus a branch, there are some other differences as well, but the key difference is it gives you that corporate veil of protection with limited liability. Minimal share capital is required. It's only £1. There's only a need for one director. That does not have to be a UK-based director. It can be good to have a UK-based director. We'll get to that in a second. A branch doesn't have that legal protection in the same way as a limited company does. It's the same legal entity as the parent. It's just a registered extension of that within the UK, which essentially means that you have to pay tax on your UK activities. They are typically the two routes that people go through. Final point on that before we move to a typical time frame for setup. It does depend on sector. It depends on what you're doing, but we see a lot in terms of being taken seriously, boots on the ground, people from overseas work with people from the UK, and the limited company route. They usually need to be there to be taken a little bit more seriously to grow. Doesn't always apply for some technology services, but that's often the case. In terms of timelines, James, if you want to quickly run through that.
Yep, perfect. I'm not sure if Kevin mentioned it there, but the vast majority of our clients do go for the subsidiary route. So 95% plus probably go for the subsidiary over the branch for all the reasons that Kevin mentioned with regards to the limited liability being the main one, and keeping that risk contained within the UK operation is something which most of our clients like. So when we talk through this, the process between branch or subsidiary in terms of the ongoing activities, it's fairly consistent. There's not a huge amount of difference in it from a HR and payroll perspective, whether it be a branch or a subsidiary. The things you have to go through remain almost exactly the same. From an accounting perspective, the subsidiary is just kept by itself and you keep the books for the UK entity. If it's a branch, you typically keep it in the overseas book, but you need to be able to pull out that UK aspect so you can report obviously from a VAT or from a corporation tax perspective on that too. And then when the requirements come for year end, there is a slight variance in it. But in terms of the setup process to register a subsidiary in the UK, 48 hours typically, so fairly quick process. Registration with Companies House, which is the register for companies in the UK. And as we've touched on, there's no requirement to have that UK-based director. If you wanted to register a branch, you would need to submit more documentation. You would need to get annual accounts, etc., translated over into English as part of the process. You submit it in paper copy, so you can't do it online. And that would typically take anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks, roughly currently, to get that branch set up. And once you've got those registered, so whether it be the branch or the subsidiary, you can legally start to trade through the entity. You don't need the bank account set up before you can trade. As soon as you've got the company, you're then in a position to trade or hire through those. The bank account is by far the longest part of the journey for anybody that's coming to the UK. There's disruptive banks online, the likes of Revolut or Wise, previously called TransferWise, which you might consider. There are some limitations in terms of what those accounts can do. So some of them might struggle to handle pension contributions by direct debit. Some of them can't be used for sponsorship licenses. So really you need to work out what you need that bank account for and make sure that the options will enable you to do that. But typically a high street bank, or using a bank maybe that you use back in your home country, so the likes of Danske Bank or Handelsbanken or SCB, for example, it will take somewhere between 3 to 6 months to get that UK bank account open. So you need to factor that into your journey, really, a time for that kind of time frame to get set up here.
And just a couple of points to add to that. We absolutely can and do help many of our clients in that regard. But if you've got a strong relationship with whoever you bank with in your home country, leverage off that relationship if you can. That may help you get an account with the equivalent bank in the UK. And the director point we touched on, it can help if you do have a UK-based director. It's not a legal requirement, but the banks often prefer it, and it can be a requirement to bank the UK entity.
Yep, exactly that. VAT registration, fairly quick submission, but it can take a number of weeks to get your VAT number back from the authorities. There are ways to start accounting for UK VAT, even if the number is not confirmed. So if you need any help on that, then again, we can support in that piece too. From a legal perspective, you need to have employers' liability insurance in place in the UK if you have UK-based employees to protect you in case of a workplace injury. And additionally, any employees that you hire have a legal obligation to have a signed employment contract by their first working day. You used to have a 1 month grace period to get that put in place, but it changed a couple of years ago. So by the first working day, there needs to be a signed employment contract for any employees. And that's obviously to protect the employee, but also to protect yourselves as the employer. The process to set up payroll, PAYE, which is social costs, is fairly straightforward and is fairly quick to put in place. So we would normally just set up for payroll the month that the employee starts, roughly. As we mentioned, benefits, I think pension is the only mandatory benefit in the UK. Just so you know, people typically offer private medical insurance, death in service, cycle to work schemes, but pension is mandatory, and employer contributions to that pension scheme are also mandatory. And the default is 3%, which will get taken, but you can choose to offer what you wish.
Can I just add one thing to that? You touched on this earlier, James. Going backwards a little bit for a second there. And it's really important about planning ahead. You talked about some of the challenges post-Brexit, and particularly the movement of people. That can take a long time. So thinking ahead and talking to people like us well ahead of when you need to move people is critically important, because there'll be numerous things that you might need to be put in place even before you can embark on that process. For example, a valid UK bank account can be a requirement in certain scenarios. So don't leave that too late if you're thinking about moving to the UK in terms of people coming across.
Yeah, and just again a bit further on that. So if the plan is that you wish to move someone from abroad to set up the UK operation, before you do anything, take some advice from an immigration lawyer. So there are certain visas which enable you to move someone to the UK expansion visa. So that would help you move someone from the UK to set up the UK operation. But if you start to perform certain activities, that visa can no longer be applied for. So if part of your strategy is to move someone from abroad to the UK, get immigration advice before you start any part of the process.
Yeah.
If we move on then just into some of the lessons learned, conscious of time, we've only got a few minutes or so. Do you want to touch on the first one, Kevin?
Yeah, so if we just move to the next slide, and these are things that there's no such thing as a typical journey that people go on. But in terms of the lessons that we learned, if we move on to the next slide, Nancy, please. That one. We work with many entrepreneurs who are driven, committed, have a strong belief in themselves and what they're trying to do, and want to do everything sometimes. They shouldn't do the things they don't need to do because they will fall foul of it. And it's not just that they will get it wrong on these, dare I say, what can be boring regulatory compliance and admin matters that we are expert at. But your time is more valuable than that. Your time is what's important in developing your product technology. Focus on that. Get somebody else to do those things. In terms of longevity, if it's not going well, James, any insights on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I speak to some companies which come here and think they'll crack the UK within 12 months because they've done it back in their home market. It'll be easy because they, again, think they know the market because of how it was back in their home country. The UK market is very competitive, although your product or service might be unique back in the home territory. I would say the likelihood is someone is doing something similar or trying to do something similar within the UK. So really understand the UK market before you make the decision to come here, and be prepared that you will have to maybe roll it for a period of time, fund it from the parent company. We see clients which come here and fund it for 5 years plus and need to be in a position to do that because it takes them considerably longer to crack the market, as I said. So understanding the competition, making sure you're clear that the UK is right and making sure that you invest in it long term, and being present, as Kevin's mentioned a couple of times, in the market is really important. Thinking you can do it from the home market realistically probably won't work. Having people in the UK and on the ground to meet people, to see clients, and do the after sale support if it's applicable is really important. So don't think it's going to be a quick win by coming to the UK just because it's a big market.
And the final one, quite rightly, you should talk to as many people as you can, people you've worked with over the years before, perhaps former colleagues, and get their knowledge, get their insight, and you build strong relationships. Why would you not do that? But you shouldn't just take things on their advice without making sure you formalize agreements and contracts, in particular when you need to. Things can and do go wrong. You need to make sure you protect yourself. So listen to people, network strongly, talk to as many people as you possibly can. You'll learn from every conversation you have. But when it comes down to doing business, you need to formalize it. We're becoming increasingly litigious in the UK, the trend that I guess is across the world, but following the US. It's really important you don't fall foul of trying to cut corners and not do things in that formal way.
Cool. And just additional people to speak to and things to bear in mind. So if you're new or thinking early stages about coming to the UK, something called the Department for Business and Trade, previously called DIT, now called DBT, can offer lots of advice and insights in terms of the UK market. So they're often based within the British embassies abroad, and they'll often give lots of free advice with regards to opportunities in the UK, connect you to the right kinds of people. So definitely consider those. And if you want introductions, then we know most of them around the world. As we touched on in terms of regionally, there's people to speak to. So there's an organisation called, for example, the West Midlands Growth Company, which is there to attract investment to the Birmingham region. Again, they can give you insights on the funding and the grants and the places to base yourself around the West Midlands. And these regional organisations, often funded by the government, are in most regions. So try and reach out to those as well, just to get the insights. So that's an overview in terms of what we do. There will be another session, as Nancy mentioned, next year, where we'll run through these slides again, and if anything's changed, obviously update on anything that might change with regards to the entry to the UK. But additionally, there will be one with regards to companies that are already active in the UK, that have already gone through this incorporation process, but maybe haven't got the traction that they wanted so far. But we'll also run a session about how you can maybe improve that and get quicker results in the UK. And we will do in the next few months as well. Nancy, I don't know if there's been any questions or anything that you want to ask.
No, there wasn't any questions throughout, but if anybody does have any questions, just pop them in the Q&A function in the bottom of your screens, and if any comes through in the next 30 seconds or so, we can definitely run through them.
Perfect, thank you. And Nancy, I guess you'll circulate the slides, people have them. If anybody is obviously in the process of expanding to the UK or wants to find out any more information, feel free to respond to Nancy. We do discovery calls where we can have half an hour and speak to you one-to-one and find out your situation. So feel free to reach out to Nancy and reply.
Yeah, if those questions come when this webinar finishes, yeah, reach out. You know, we're there. We can talk without committing to anything, without charging, to discover what you need.
Had a question through. Can both of you see that, or I can read it out?
I can see it, yeah. So we're a SaaS company. If we stumble across a UK customer, can we start selling to them directly, or do we need to set up the company first, as you mentioned? So no, I mean, again, we have lots of clients. It's kind of like a chicken and egg. When do we set up and when can we kind of just do it from overseas? You are allowed to sell into the UK from overseas. You don't need to set something up just because you have a customer here. There will be certain activities which might trigger a requirement, as Kevin mentioned, to form something within the UK. Obviously, if you start to hire people here, then again, you get close to the point where you need to incorporate. Bear in mind VAT and charging VAT cross-border, that's something which you need to make sure you get right. And again, if we can advise you on that, there's different rules in the UK with regards to whether it be in service or product, where the supply is, and a range of different things. So consider the VAT aspect, but yes, you can absolutely do it from abroad into the UK.
Absolutely. If you've got no physical presence, no people, and it's SaaS, you're okay.
We've not had any more since then, so I guess we will wrap up for the day. We do have a whole calendar full of other seminars scheduled over the next year, so make sure to check them out on the address on the screen. But yeah, that's it for now. Thank you everybody for attending. I'll be sure to send out the recording.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye.